you're just a few years removed from these people. And so I hope you find some inspiration from what they're doing. And I hope you listen to the excitement and the passion that they brought forward, right? So at the very end, like you said, this may not be for you. But along the way, hopefully one of you will say, hey, that sounds cool. I think I want to go into that. I took some notes, believe it or not. And I have some questions I would like to ask them, but maybe we can start with the crowd because this is really for you first. So is there anybody that have any questions? So let's see if I can get the names right here. This is Larson, this is Deniz, this is Carolyn, and that's Samantha. So anybody in the crowd who want to sort of, go ahead. Yeah.
Question for Larson.
Just make sure you speak loud. So
Yeah, question for Larson. How do you get into the niche of HAT disease?
Yeah.
How do you choose that's the disease I want to study?
That's a great question. So basically, at a young age, actually when I was in high school, I realized that I really liked parasites for some reason. I read like some books. I think I picked up I went to the library, picked up a textbook, and I just read all about them. You know, you would see all these like worms, parasitic insects, trypanosomes, and protozoa. There's so many different ones, amoebas, all that stuff. And when it got to the point where I was applying to graduate school, I gained some experience working with parasites actually beforehand. I worked with chicken parasites initially. This is like a lot of chicken feces. Like we're talking like I'm drowning in chicken crap. It's a lot. And I realized I did not want to work with the chickens anymore. I wanted to look at more human stuff. So I just what I did is I looked, what are some research out here? I wanted to study neglected tropical disease, and in Canada, it makes it a little harder because we're in a society where, fortunately, we're not exposed to these diseases all the time. Thank you. But I wanted to discover and explore. So I looked at the researchers here in McGill, the Institute of Parasitology. They have a few things. There's malaria. There's trypanosomes, like we do Chagas disease, if you guys may have heard that one as well. And there's other things, schistosomiasis, all this stuff. So, you just kind of like got into this weird niche. I was like, hey, let's check it out, and went with it. So I think I got lucky in being like, this is what I wanted to do, this is my organism. That's how it goes. Hopefully that was a good answer for you.
I don't think he got lucky. Did anyone see the pattern of he liked something, he read up on it, and he ended up there? I don't think maybe there's a little bit of luck, but I think there's a lot of self-direction there. Great question. Other question? Yeah, nice and loud, go ahead.
I have a question for Samantha. I know that honeybees threaten a lot of native bees because they take up the flowers that they use in the pollinate. So in your research, did you find do you think there's a way for both of them to cohabitate, or if you were to prioritize one pollinators, you have to get rid of honeybees in a way?
Yeah, unfortunately that is true because honeybees are non-invasive. They came from Europe. They tend to outcompete a lot of our native species for their flower resources, like you were saying. Unfortunately, we can't just really remove one. We're so reliant on honeybees for our crops, and they do have a lot of benefits for our agriculture. Probably the best way is to think about the habitat surrounding the farms. So the farms are really monoculture, so honeybees can thrive fine there, but our native bees can't really. So focusing on restoring habitats, natural environments surrounding the farms is probably the best way to try to give them both a full shot.
Great, any other questions? Go ahead.
For Deniz. So I'm not that familiar, I guess, with agriculture and all that, but I know this is from way back, but in primary school, what they often talk about, crop rotation, and how it's somehow better for the soil. But from what you presented, it seems like that's not the case. As you mentioned, we want to maximize the amount of roots you have in the soil over long term. So how would that fit in with the idea of encouraging crop rotation?
nitrogen present in the soil, and that saves them money, and it helps the soil in the long run. So yeah, agriculture is super nuanced and complex for that, and it's hard to know, say definitively like what's right for every context. But my answer is always just like look to nature more than the chemical inputs and try to build resilience into your cropping system, whatever that is. Yeah, that's fine.
Great answer. Any other questions? Sophie?
My question's for Carolyn. I was wondering, you said that 1 in 5 Indigenous people in Canada are still facing discrimination in the healthcare system. I was wondering if you'd also looked at like what kind of forms of discrimination those people are facing, and then how you're going to kind of bring that into the recommendations you make to improve the cultural safety.
That's a good question. So the data that I used for that comes from a Canadian-wide survey, and it's also not specific to any healthcare professions, right? So I don't know if it's doctors, I don't know if it's physios, I don't know, so it's more generally, and most of it took the form of like interpersonal, I guess, discrimination, kind of feeling dismissed or not having culturally appropriate solutions, feeling ignored, so things like that. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So for Carolyn, what do you think is different between doing more human science than harder science?
Sorry?
So what do you think is different between doing a more human-focused science than a harder science?
A human
It's like a
like the difference? That's a very good question. Because I'm a francophone, so I'm more used to hearing the francophone terminology when it comes to that. But I was in hard sciences pretty much my whole life, CEGEP too. And I guess I just switched. I feel it helps, especially when you're more in the healthcare field, it helps to ground what you're doing more in society's needs. So more like a public health type of approach, where you consider broader forces, socioeconomic status, and things like that, and how that influences your health. So you're looking more up, you're looking outside, instead of just looking at something very specific. That's how I personally see it for my very specific field of nutrition. But other people might have different answers for you. But I like to think that I'm combining both.
Any other questions? I'm going to start with Larson. Larson lost me in biology. That's why I went into engineering. But I was thinking though, when we were studying the proteins, and I was wondering, can you borrow work from other diseases and other flies or parasites that may have something in common with this? And can you take some of what other people are doing and be transferred into yours?
Like, are you asking, can I take genes from another disease, a parasite, whatever,
Or even the study of it and borrow some of their information, borrow some of their...
Yes, exactly, yeah. You can definitely do this. There's a whole bunch of evolutionary phylogenetic stuff. So, for example, you guys may have heard of Chagas disease, I may have mentioned it earlier. These two parasites, Trypanosoma brucei and Trypanosoma cruzi, are basically cousins. And a lot of the research that happens in one organism can actually be applied to the other. So, researchers will be like, oh, they find X and Y in this parasite, then they do the tests in the other, and they're able to see, okay, this is actually consistent with all these parasites here.
Deniz, you were talking about the different crops. I was wondering, are we getting to the point where we're going to have specific hybrids for different geographical regions? Like this is a great resource for maybe Western Canada, but not for Kansas or not for Missouri, or, because you said there's one sort of crop or one sort of seed that we're at 90%, you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the crop breeding side of things. A lot of people are working on that. I think if I had to make a suggestion or a prediction, it would be that, yeah, I think the more locally adapted your meat variety is, the better. And does that sure there's people, if you could just find them, that are knowledgeable about other varieties of bees that maybe are even like, maybe they're being grown, they're just like, you know, that figure 95% is so wide, but within that 5% there's just this vast diversity of different varieties that are grown for different things, or like niche markets. So it's going to be about scaling that up in the end, seeing what worked in one climate, in one soil type, and seeing if another place has a similar climate and soil type, or will in the near future, and just bring that seed in and see what happens. Of course, you're messing with the ecology when you're bringing in a foreign species, but it's all part of the adaptation process.
While we're talking, does anybody else come up with more questions? Again, I'd rather hear your questions than mine. Keep on going. Carolyn, really interesting to have this idea of John about this culture gap, right? So I was wondering, how much of that gap and that information, if you're building this, how much is that you sitting down with Indigenous people having conversations? And you said, I'm not the lab, but I wonder if your lab is the kitchen table, the community center. I mean, how much of it is just sort of one-on-one talks?
So, very good question. My research, I don't, for this specific project, I don't target Indigenous patients. So I don't go to Indigenous patients and ask them what the solutions are. And the idea for that is to just embody the spirit of reconciliation. So I'm not Indigenous, but my supervisor is Indigenous. And I'm just working with the faculty and the school, most of whom are not Indigenous, to find solutions because we do have the information. So when you look at the literature, research articles, you have clearly outlined information that you can use in order to find a solution. So I like to think of it as us doing the work instead of going for like, you know, an easy solution by asking the person how they would want to be treated. So taking the harder road, but it's needed.
And Samantha, my children spent hours in the museum. I know that museum with the back of my hand, and so my family started Samantha. I had no idea about cranberries in Quebec. I thought all cranberries were out west. So this is maybe all three of you can, or all four of you can talk about this. Probably the three of you here. Climate change is a big talk we're having, and I'm just wondering, are the native species well adapted to climate change adaptations? Are you seeing any risk? Are you seeing die-offs as the years progress? Are you seeing anything that we should be aware or worried about?
Yeah, definitely, especially with our native pollinators. They're very adapted to our environment, and especially for like mating and hibernation. We have very specific like cycles throughout the year, and if that's disrupted, it can be very difficult for them. There are some diseases too that are kind of exacerbated with climate change for honeybees specifically, like colony collapse disorder, where the worker bees just leave the hive all of a sudden. There's probably multiple reasons for like disease, climate change, environmental stressors in general. So it's really having a huge effect. Honeybee colonies have actually decreased by 45% in the past few years, and it's probably projected to decrease even more. So that's kind of what we're seeing. You're not really adapting to, honestly.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead.
For Samantha, because you were saying that like for insects especially, there's a lot more species. I think you're saying there's over 1 million. And I know in the world we often talk about these years like, oh, like this animal is doing this thing, this animal is doing this thing, but we don't talk about insects as much. But do you know like what the number, or close to the number, are we losing a lot of insect species like yearly now? Now they climate change and stuff?
Honestly, that's a great question. I'm not really sure because mine is mostly focused on like honeybees and native bees, but honestly probably. And there's so many insects out there that not everyone can research everything, so for all we know, things could just be going extinct and we're not even aware of it because no one's researching it. There's just so many.
I know a number, I must have read it somewhere, don't take it too seriously, but the number that was minus 70% since 1970, which is like when we start, we were seeing like collapsing insect populations around the world is what I've heard. And it's very sensitive to drought, so we saw in Kansas in 2023 a like 60% decline in yield in the average. And this is in the breadbasket of the US. So they were very concerned about that. They had to like import grain for the first time. And normally they're exporting their grain. Yeah, so I mean, how to combat that? Obviously we need breeders like keeping ahead and like introducing the genetic traits that will help. But in the absence of that, like there are studies that show that if you just grow other crops with weeds, it helps mitigate some of the effects of climate change on yields, whether it's drought or like extreme weather events. So that's really promising because that's like a solution we can implement next growing season.
Like you said, just listening to nature again.
Yeah, and really diversity is a good place to start.
Go ahead, yeah.
So, just following on what you just said, what kind of crops do you grow in addition to the wheat? What helps?
To grow with wheat?
Yeah.
Well, we're experimenting with bean. It's not super widely done yet, but I think it's a natural combination because the bean is in the soil as the root. It can grow on the wheat stalk. The thing about, like there's, like the sky's the limit with polycultures. The thing that limits us is the technology that farmers currently use to harvest. That's why you don't see many intercrops because the technology isn't adapted to do anything except harvest one type of grain. But with a little bit of technological innovation, I'm sure we can make it work.
I see some master's PhD work right there. Yeah. I think we're going to wrap up. Go ahead, yeah.
There's just a question again for like how receptive are people to your suggestions? Like this goes kind of both to family. Like how receptive are people in general to the suggestions that you bring to the table?
I haven't had the chance to talk to farmers yet, which is a huge regret of mine and a big gap in my overall graduate school experience so far. I'm wondering that myself. I'm wondering what do farmers think about the changes that scientists are saying need to happen, because I know there's barriers to adoption and I know those barriers are usually economic, but what else, So if I were to do anything, if I were to do a PhD right now, if I were the first thing I would want to do after this master's is understand what's going through farmers' heads and learn what their needs are, why aren't they adopting these practices.
And for me, I do have the support from the teachers in my program to do this. So to me, that was also expressed for them to review the curriculum and incorporate more cultural safety education. But I will say, it is sometimes it can be an uncomfortable topic to discuss, especially for people who are not used or less familiar with this. But then I like to think that if it's too comfortable, then there's no change. So you need to have discomfort and you need to feel uncomfortable in order to have transformative change.
Guys, before we go, these are all first and 2-year CJET students. And I've always said sometimes they think that life is going to be a straight line and I want to do this. So there's 4 of you here. I just want to know, does anybody have any advice for them in terms of what they should think about before going to university and what they should be doing now to prepare themselves?
I guess gain experience in any way that you can. Entomology was not my first choice, not my second or third choice. Actually, I didn't even think about it. I wanted to be a doctor, like a pediatrician, since I was 10 years old. And then I landed that job, and I thought it was just so cool. I changed the trajectory completely. So just gaining some experiences, you learn new things that you never thought you would before, and really changes your life.
For me, it's you don't have to fall into a box. Again, when I was in CJET, I wanted to become a doctor. 99.9% of the people who study sciences de la santé, I don't know what's the translation for that here. But then I just realized it wasn't for me. I was like, oh, nutrition, dietitian, food. I will get to see blood, thank God. And after I started practicing, and I was like, it's still not fulfilling. And I used to love history and love philosophy and language courses at CJET. I was so good in French for some reason. And then I was like, okay, you just combine everything. So I'm still doing health sciences, I'm still dietetics, but I'm just combining it with other stuff. And it really doesn't fall into your typical box of what dietetics or nutrition looks like. So just don't be afraid, and you'll figure out how to combine your interests in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, like I always knew I wanted to do something for the environment, and I'm from the United States, so you typically do undergrad major in your senior year, like of high school, which is what you then go to college to study, unless you're undecided. But I wanted to do environmental science, like 100%. I never dropped that major. I just stuck with it all 4 years of university, and I just ended up like specializing and deciding that I wanted to do like forestry or just study how climate change is affecting forests. And when it came time to apply to graduate school, just worked out that I went into soil and agriculture, which I had not learned anything about in undergrad. So it was a bit random, but I had like other priorities I was juggling at the time, and I was still like very, very interested in soil. And yeah, after 2 years of studying soil, I still think it's like the most important substance in the world, but what I mostly value about it is its use for human beings and how like we can steward it better. So that's kind of the component of my education that I haven't received so far, and that I'm gonna try to get in the future with future studies. Like honestly, like it's a shock to me, but I would go into, if not like pure sociology, like just a project with like a heavy sociological component or an anthropological component, and that is shocking as someone who wanted nothing to do with people in college. I just wanted to study trees, you know. But things change. It's surprising. You just go with the flow and surprise yourself sometimes.
And for me, one thing I would suggest is just explore everything. Like, if you see something, like maybe you want to be a scientist, you want to go in that hard science, whatever, why not go look into the other aspects, other avenues as well, whether it's social science, whether it's economics, and you kind of like want to understand the full picture of things. And honestly, understanding the full picture of what you want to do in life will really make you understand what I want to do, where I see myself, and what are my opportunities. Because so many things are just so niche and random. You see all these jobs, you see things like doctor, teacher, lawyer, all this stuff, but nobody thinks of all the other smaller positions that you never hear of, that never get talked about. So I'd say look at the big thing, explore, and don't be afraid to pivot. So yeah, so many opportunities.
It's a great way to end.